Outwardly, they're acting very normal and not intruding with anybody. But the fear is that won't last. At some point, someone or many people will upset them and they will go back to the way they were in 1996. They do go out every day. One, to sort of like try and reduce that fear in myself. And two, just to sort of show the Taliban like, hey, you know, I'm not gonna like stop living my life.
Ali Latifi, you're the online correspondent for Al Jazeera English. You're based in Kabul. What's the situation there on the ground at the moment?
The situation on the ground in Kabul, I mean, essentially since the first day the Taliban took over, I've been going out, walking on the streets, driving around, just trying to see different parts of the city, see what's going on. It's still outwardly relatively calm. The Taliban are essentially keeping them to themselves. There are reports of things like home searches and possible disappearances and possible shootings, things like that, but those are very hard to verify. And I'm not saying that they're not true, I'm just saying that I personally haven't seen them or been able to verify them, so I can't say anything about that other than that the reports exist. You know, there are clear reports and even footage of the Taliban shooting on protesters in Jalalabad a couple days ago. So that's something that, you know, has been pretty much confirmed. But in terms of the city of Kabul, as I said, outwardly, in the way I see it, you know, going out on the streets, talking to people, sort of just seeing daily life. Like, daily life isn't fully back to normal at all. Every day there are more and more people out on the streets, more cars, more shops and businesses are reopening. But it's still not anywhere near what it would be on a normal day in Kabul. And the most obvious change that you realize almost right away is that Kabul has become an almost entirely male city. It's not to say that women don't go out, they do. But, you know, on a single day, if you walk around the city, if you're out most of the day, now you might see 100 women. Whereas in the past, you know, there was plenty of, you know, women and girls out on the streets. And in, like, for instance, I've been going to 3 restaurants since the Taliban took over. And, you know, one fairly simple one, 2, you know, more fancy, more high-end types. And like one of them, which we used to hang out in all the time, including, you know, me and my female friends, I don't see a single woman anymore. You know, you used to see families in these places, you know, with children and like husbands and wives and children and, you know, young men and women sitting next to each other and laughing. Or, you know, sometimes you might see like, you know, girls deciding to separate for whatever reason, but they were still there. And now, as far as I've seen, they're not. So that's a big, like very immediate, obvious difference. And now the question is, what will it take for more women to feel comfortable to just go out and go back to normal life, you know? Because like I said, like, you know, we all used to hang out at these places and you know, it's not even just like, you know, young, sort of more hip, you know, social media age girls. It's also like women, like mothers and, you know, teachers, and, you know, they'll go to work. You know, if their place of work is open, they'll go to work, but they won't, you know, necessarily just go out, you know, say to the store or, you know, to like a restaurant or you know, something like that.
What's the main fear that's keeping these women out of public eye at the moment?
It's obviously very much women, but it's also men too. It's everybody. And I think the fear is that the Taliban, like right now, out in the open, and like I said, I can only talk about what I see out in the open because I'm not able to go to people's houses all, you know. But out in the open, they're very nice. They're very calm. They leave you alone. They don't, like, for instance, today was the first day I went out in jeans and a t-shirt. And there was one, you could tell he kind of looked at me weird, but he didn't say anything. he just let me walk off. You know, he was with his friends. He was sitting there by an ice cream shop, didn't say anything. So they are out, as I said, outwardly they're acting very normal, and not intruding with anybody. But the fear is that that won't last. You know, that at some point someone or many people will upset them and they will go back to the way they were in 1996, where, you know, women, except for doctors, weren't allowed to work, girls weren't able to go to school, where, you know, men had to wear very specific clothing and have a certain kind of beard, and were expected, you know, when it was prayer time, to be in the masjid praying, or face, you know, potential beatings, where people couldn't listen to music or watch movies or go online, although, like, you know, the internet wasn't that big anywhere in the world at that time, but still, that's the fear, is that eventually they'll just go back to that. And nobody wants to be out when they do go back to that, not men, and especially not women.
What's the situation for people who are trying to leave Kabul, trying to get out of Afghanistan at the moment?
It's very difficult for many different reasons. One big reason is that in the last 3 months, all of these countries, you know, the US, the UK, France, Germany, Canada, they've been saying, oh, we'll give people visas. You know, if you worked with our military, or with like certain companies that are tied to us, we'll give you visas. Or like if you're a journalist or a rights worker or a prominent woman or this or that. But the problem is that those are not straightforward at all. They're very opaque processes. It's very difficult to get in contact with the respective embassy and figure out how to go about the entire process and to make sure that you have everything in order, right? And at the same time, they're very exacting with their requirements. You know, in a country where there haven't been a lot of records, where even the foreigners don't necessarily keep very good records, and you're talking about people who had worked with X country 5 years ago or 10 years ago, trying to reach out to their highest ranking superior to give them some kind of a letter or recommendation. And even when they're able to track down that person, a lot of times that person will say, they'll say, like, I haven't worked, you know, with this military or with this company or this contractor in however many years. I don't even know if I have authority anymore, nor do I know, you know, how properly to send this. So there's a real lack of information. And yet they're very exacting. It's a litany of bureaucracy. I mean, it's just like stupid forms in Excel format, forms in PDFs that you can't edit. Just weird requirements that, you know, I'm afraid that, you know, people will be left behind because they didn't fill out a piece of paper, you know. So that's a big problem that created an unrealistic expectation out of people because they didn't know, you know. And a lot of the people who are at the airport right now were stuck somewhere in that process and don't know what to do. I mean, the last couple of days when I've been walking out, people are asking me, where's the British embassy? Where's the French embassy? And in my head, I'm like, why are you asking? They're not even there, you know. Or the on the first day of Taliban rule, this guy was trying to go to the Canadian embassy, and the Taliban were like, the Canadians aren't there. Their embassy is closed. And I told them, I said, they're telling the truth. So that's a big problem. And then in terms of the airport itself, on August 15th, when the president fled, after that, thousands of people stormed the Kabul airport. I mean, just imagine like people just running into this airport. And, you know, police had disappeared. A lot of airport staff had disappeared. And so they're just like rushing through this airport. So scanners were ruined, like security scanners, parts of the gate, parts of the terminal, parts of the airplanes. The only thing that was good is the runway. And so it created this madness that I'm sure you saw the footage online of like people literally hanging onto the tires of the airplane and then plummeting to their deaths. And then, you know, people started to get the idea that if we show up to the airport, you know, they'll let us in and then we'll be able to just get on a flight to wherever, even if they don't have documents. And so now it's this situation where right in front of the airport, there's hundreds of families, like women, children, babies, just waiting there. And the US is not letting anybody in. The airport is damaged. the US is telling the Taliban not to let anyone in, so the Taliban are shooting aerial shots whenever the people get close. And if, say, for instance, if the people do make it into the airport, then the US is also at least firing tear gas, if not shooting at them, or shooting into the air to disperse them. So it's quite a mess. It's a chaotic situation all around. No one has taken proper control of that perimeter whatsoever now, because the Taliban at this point are just shooting into the air and like trying to hit people with plastic pipes.
You said you were raised in California. When did you first go back to return to Kabul?
2011, and then I was coming back from 2011 to 2013 every 2-3 months, and then in 2013 I officially moved back, and pretty much the entire time I've been living here.
So I imagine it must be a very trying situation for yourself, just seeing how dramatically things have altered very quickly.
Yeah.
What are you feeling at the moment?
Trying to keep hopeful and positive. I'm hoping that, the Taliban stand by their word and, actually try and make efforts to change, to not be those same people they were in the 90s. And then the other thing is that every single day, it's you're renegotiating the situation with yourself. Should I go out? Although purposely I do go out every day. One, to sort of like try and reduce that fear in myself, and two, just to sort of show the Taliban like, hey, I'm not gonna like stop living my life. And obviously I'm very privileged as a man that I can go out and do these things with much less fear than a woman would. But obviously the same fear exists. The fear exists that, one day they'll come to my house, or one day they'll just stop me on the street and I don't know what they'll do. But I guess the only thing, and maybe it's naive, but I guess the only thing you can do right now is try to be hopeful and focus on as much of the positive as you can, because we have very little options. And I mean, my option is obviously to leave, but I don't want to do that because I don't want the Taliban to have driven me out, And I understand other people don't have the luxury I do, so they're going to extremes to try and leave, and I have, no judgment on those people. But for myself personally, because I know I have, way more opportunities than other people, I want to try and continue to tell the story of this place. And like I said, try and last here as long as I can, but I honestly don't know how long that will be. It could be another week, could be another month, could be another year.
There's been reports that in some places journalists have been targeted. What are you doing at the moment to protect yourself, or as a precaution against any danger around that?
I guess that's part of why I keep going out, for them to see that, and I keep showing I carry around my Al Jazeera ID everywhere, and trying to, I don't know if I'm doing anything specific, honestly, but I'm just trying to remain cognizant and trying to avoid unnecessary risks as much as possible. Because at this point, the only thing I can do is show the reality that I see. And I think that that's very important, because unfortunately right now there aren't a lot of journalists who can, who can say what they want, who can try and tell the story to an English-speaking audience from the ground, anyways.
The kind of messaging that we've seen coming from the Taliban has been it seems quite accommodating.
Exactly.
As if they're not going to impose restrictions as they did in the past.
Yeah.
What do you think their game is?
I mean, obviously they're telling people what they want to hear, right? They're telling the world what they want to hear. And so now they have to live up to that, But the other part of that is, one thing that I was very happy about the press conference they had last week is that They spoke in three languages. They spoke in Pashto, they spoke in Dari, and they spoke in English. And all of that messaging got blasted around the world. Like, I wrote about it for Al Jazeera, other journalists wrote about it for other outlets. I'm sure it was eventually translated into, so many other languages. So the good thing about that is now it's on the record. It's official. You can say that on this day, you stood in the government media and information center in Kabul and said this, but now you're acting this way. And obviously, they're, as you said, they're trying to be very accommodating. They're trying to put up a great face, which is, again, what I'm trying to say is what I'm saying about how they're trying to act on the outside, on the streets. So now it's very important that they follow through with that, with actions, and that in case they don't, and it can be proven that they don't, then it's up to, because unfortunately they're not going to listen to the Afghan people. Not many people have, not even over these last 20 years of U.S. occupation. No one really listens to the Afghan people. But so that's why it's because they tried very hard over the last few years to sort of woo the rest of the world. They went on this diplomatic world tour, as we call it. So it's very important for all of these other countries in the United Nations to keep the pressure on them, and whenever they go against their word, to put the pressure on them and to say, we know you're doing this and you have to stop this because we will, retaliate this way. I doubt they will respond militarily, but they also are desperate for recognition, and they know that they need money. So those are two very powerful tools at the disposal of the rest of the world. Whether they'll actually put them to use is something else.
You mentioned before that it's quite important for the international community to maintain pressure, to maintain scrutiny on the Taliban. Apart from that, or as part of that, more specifically, what can be done on an international level to make things better for the Afghanis?
I mean, really putting pressure on the Taliban, putting pressure on them to create an inclusive government, which they claim they want to do. And this is, like I said, this is the best part, is that all of this is on the record. It was like an hour-long press conference, and they addressed all of these issues. So now, people can come and say, well, you said you wanted an inclusive government. You said you didn't want to keep women and girls from school and work. You said you were going to give a blanket amnesty. You said that you have no interest in discriminating against minorities. All of these things are out there in the public record. So now it's up to these countries that the Taliban has been meeting since 2011, when Obama first sent their political leaders to Doha, to start what should have been a negotiation process then, and who they've been meeting directly now, and having like photo opportunities for at least 2 years. So now, because they're so desperate for, part of why they're putting up this great face is they're desperate for international recognition. They don't want to be a pariah state like they were in '96. And they especially don't want to be cut off from foreign funding, because they know they can't make their own money. This government couldn't manage to make its own money. How could they?
I understand that the Chinese Communist Party have signaled that they're prepared to recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. Do you have any thoughts on this?
The Taliban have been meeting with the Chinese essentially ever since they got to Doha. They were also meeting with the Europeans. They're meeting with the Germans, either directly or indirectly, with the Norwegians. They're meeting with Americans, of course. They're meeting with Pakistanis and Iranis, of course, who, have been aiding and abetting them for years and years now. And the Chinese, there have been reports in the past saying that they and the Russians were also trying to support the Taliban in one way or another. And the most important thing is, just 2 months ago, the Taliban were in Beijing, and they said, we won't allow Uyghur separatist fighters into Afghanistan, and we won't support them, which is, such a phenomenal admission by them, because they're claiming to be, a group that is for Muslim sovereignty and for Muslim rights, and we know how abused the Uyghurs are in China. So that's a big part of it, is them giving China that reassurance.
And just lastly, Ali, what's your greatest hope that the Afghan people will be able to hold on to something of the improved freedoms that they've had over the last 2 decades?
Yeah, that's literally it, right? That the people of Afghanistan have tasted freedoms in different parts of history, in the 60s, in the 70s, before the Soviet occupation, before the communist rule, you know, over the last 20 years, even more so. Um, so it's very important, and this is the one thing that makes me happy and hopeful is that this is not the same country as 1996. In 1996, we were coming out of a civil war, we were coming out of a Soviet occupation. People had very little hope. They had nothing. They couldn't even remember the days of the kingdom or the First Republic because they were so scarred. Now there are enough people who lived good enough lives, who did well enough for themselves, who had exposure either to the outside world or with people from the outside world, and the internet and freedom of speech and all of these things, that they won't stand by as easily. For instance, on the first 2 or 3, I think it was the second day into the Taliban rule, the private media stations all put their female anchors on all the news broadcasts, and they sent their female reporters out on the street. And at that time, the Taliban were much more visible on the street. So you would see live shots of a female reporter standing on a street in Kabul, and there's like a Talib right next to her. So these kinds of things are very important. There was a female presenter from the national broadcaster, which is, obviously government operated. And since the Taliban see themselves as the government, they just took over. They kicked her out, wouldn't let her into the studio. She went online and made a video about it. And what that means is it's not, like I said earlier, right? Like I can only confirm what's out in the open that I can see. That's something that's out in the open. That's something that could have remained hidden in a government office, 20 something years ago. But now people have the ability to put this out there. And people have, they've experienced having so many more opportunities. They haven't had either ever or in a really long time. So hopefully that will also be part of the pushback against the Taliban.
Ali, thank you very much for your ground level perspective on what's happening there in Kabul. Our thoughts will certainly be with the people there, and we'll be watching very closely what unfolds in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you.